people said to me, what's your 5-year plan? And I said, I don't have a 5-year plan, I have a 5-minute plan. And the 5-minute plan is to make this piece of work as brilliant as I can possibly make it. I can control this moment. I can't control what's going to happen tomorrow. The way I can control it, or I can influence it, is by doing something great.
Hello and welcome to the Courageous Leaders podcast. I'm Joanna Howes, your host and founder of The Change Creators. We focus on helping leadership teams build trust, alignment and cohesion to win together. On today's episode, I'm very excited as we are joined by Sir John Hegarty, co-founder of BBH and the Garage Soho. Sir John Hegarty is a legendary figure in advertising with over 6 decades of experience working with brands like Levi's and Audi. Knighted in 2007, he has received numerous honours, including the Cannes Lion of St Mark, and has authored 2 acclaimed books on creativity and advertising. Let's get started. Sir John Hegarty, welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here. Absolutely great.
It's an honour, and I do need to say, I'm loving the suit. It is such a good
suit.
Isn't
it?
It's so impressive.
It comes out of never be ordinary,
Oh, I like it. We're starting there. The first question I love to ask is to find out what has been a courageous moment for you.
I suppose that when you ask that question and you think about what you're doing, if you're in a creative process, if you're in a creative industry, you kind of have lots of courageous moments, so to speak, every week, every month, because you're kind of creating work that's trying to be different. And difference is always difficult because there's not really a precedent for it. That's part of what a brand should be about. But I suppose overall, looking at my career, a courageous moment was leaving TBWA to set up BBH in 1982. And apart from the fact that, TBWA had just been voted campaigns ever first agency of the year. We just won the Grand Prix at Cannes for Lego. We were flying. But we decided that really we weren't getting our just rewards and that we wanted to renegotiate our contract with them. That was turned down. So we said, fine, we'll leave. And so we decided to leave to set BBH up. And as we were kind of creating the image of the agency, what was it going to be out? Nigel Bogle said, look, I think what we should do is we shouldn't do speculative creative work. And there was this distinct silence from John Bartle and myself, because part of what you're going to do as a new agent, you've got no clients, you're going to pitch. And he then said, look, if we want people to value the fact that we're a creatively driven company backed by outstanding strategy, then we shouldn't be giving that away for free in pitches, and it makes a point of difference about us versus everybody else. And we decided to do it, and it was a courageous moment. And if it had failed, I was always going to blame Nigel. It was your idea, it wasn't my idea. But it actually succeeded in exactly the way he articulated it, which is that it separated us from everybody else. And of course, with something like that, you then have to make the decision. You have to recognize that you're not going to do government work, because the government, which was a big employer of agencies back then, under the banner of the COI, would always want to see work. And it reminded everybody of that principle of a principle isn't a principle until it's cost you money.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, so that really was, I suppose, the moment, which actually paid off.
Which is brilliant to hear. But that is really courageous, because if I think now of all the leaders I work with and what's going on in the agency, the courage to not do that, especially the economy now, I don't know about you, this time of year, I'm just hearing pitching, we've got this pitch on, that pitch on, and it's killing the teams, it's killing the agencies.
It's become a kind of quite destructive element within an agency's output, in the sense that so much energy goes into pitching. Of course, eventually, after something like 20 years, we started to do pitches because it became a global industry and we couldn't get everybody in one room. And the only way they could ever agree on anything was by looking at a piece of work, tragically. I always regretted it. And, times change. You've got to be, you've got to decide, do you evolve or do you just, die? It's like, today going, I believe in the internal combustion engine and I think electric cars are terrible and I'm never going to make one. And you go, well, I think you'll be out of business in 10 years' time. So you have to change with times. You have to respond to it, but you've got to remind yourself of why you're doing it. Is it for the right reasons? And, when markets change, you have to change with them. You have to evolve with them.
And I just want to take a little step back to young John, being a junior art director. And now, where you are today, it's incredible what you've achieved. But if you reflect back to you as a young art director, did you have any idea this was going to be your path?
None at all. I mean, even at a young, I always had a philosophy, which is, people said to me, what's your 5-year plan? And I said, I don't have a 5-year plan. I have a 5-minute plan. And the 5-minute plan is to make this piece of work as brilliant as I can possibly make it. I can control this moment. I can't control what's going to happen tomorrow. In any way. The way I can control it or I can influence it is by doing something great. And that gets people noticing you, talking about you, and wanting to kind of engage with you. And of course, the other thing is when you do great work, when you do great things, hopefully you do great work, it opens all kinds of doors, and you don't know which doors it's going to open. And the one thing I've learned throughout my career is, and it still drives me today really with everything I'm doing, is how a brilliant idea changes everything. With all the kind of logic, with all the kind of, data and all of that, get all that. A brilliant idea can change everything. And it's the thing I learned at BBH when we were much more in control, when, we were creating ideas that were kind of, became culturally important and culturally relevant and were talked about. They changed the fortunes of everything. And I think people forget that in an industry today where there's lots of logic, there's lots of left brain and not enough right brain, creating brilliant ideas, creating empathy, changing the direction of the way somebody sees something, looks at something. So I think, that's the thing. As a young art director, I was about working on now. This is the moment that's really important. But over my career, I've realized how important that was. And I don't know where that came from. I just didn't have much vision, really. I could only focus on this bit now. Tomorrow, it's too complicated. I can't do it, Cross that bridge when we come to it.
But it's so interesting, isn't it? Because you think so many leaders and all the CEOs, you've got to be visionary. You've got to have a vision. You've got to have your plan. And it's a lovely different perspective to go, no, be in the now. But did you find as your leadership grew and how BBH, the success kind of grew and grew, that the plan did become something that you needed to lean into?
You did a little bit. I mean, but I don't think we sort of looked at what was happening and we said, how do you respond to that? And so, obviously it was about creating great work. Was that change the fortunes of brands? Creativity and effectiveness was crucial to the way we thought and executed our work. But we also anticipated things. I mean, there was anticipation there about it was going to become a global industry. Technology was going to drive it in that direction. So therefore, we had to have a point of view about working with clients globally. We initially thought we could do it all from London. Our logic was, well, Hollywood, operates from one location. Why can't advertising operate from one location? You realize that becomes unworkable because just of time differences and the complexities of brands and having to respond to national needs. So then we developed a strategy of opening offices in other countries. So the first office we opened was in Singapore. And everybody thought we would go to New York first. And we thought, no, we won't do that. In our kind of, when the world zigs, you zag. When everybody thought we were going to go west, we went east. And opened in Singapore. Then we opened in New York, and then Mumbai, and then Shanghai, and then LA and Stockholm, and so that was a kind of response to market. Yeah. Thinking about the market, thinking about where is it going? It's going to go global, and being sensitive and being aware. I think that comes down to what great creative people are. I'm not saying about my partners were. Very much, John and Nigel were very much aware of this. But, that brilliant thing of, I always used to say, I work in advertising, I don't live in advertising. And I think very successful people bring the outside world in. They don't live in an echo chamber. And the tragedy today is that technology is driving us into echo chambers. And I think the truly successful people are going to be those that stand outside and look in and bring something else. Not that I'm a fan of Elon Musk, but I have to respect the fact that he thinks like that. He looks at a market and goes, well, why is it like that? It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, it's very good. The book about him, which I read about 6 or 7 years ago, is very, very good. I mean, before he became the Elon Musk he is today. But, let's separate those things out. I think he does talk an incredible amount of sense at times that other leaders could think about. But that's very important. You bring the outside world in. And that's what creativity teaches you.
Yeah.
It teaches you that element of, you're looking, seeing, thinking about things, and then how do I bring that into my creativity?
And then connect all the dots. And what I love listening to you is just a different language in terms of this anticipation, asking that question, how do we respond, versus going that 5-year plan, it's on the table, but you know what, I'm just going to be in the business too much and not keep looking out.
Yeah.
There's a lovely term leaders the other week said to me, we've got to keep zooming out. We could be zooming in too much.
Yeah.
And I think that's so,
very much so.
And clever.
And the trouble today is, with that, we talk about data and we talk about big data now. And actually, we've rebranded it big data.
It's very important.
It'll soon be, I guarantee, you've heard it here first, it'll be mega data soon. I can see it coming over the hills.
Mega.
Mega data now. And the trouble with that is it's all backward looking, and it sort of assumes there's a straight line. And of course, if you think about it, I was just thinking the other day about when you talk about what's happening next. I mean, there must be 1 billion kind of interactions that are forming what's going to happen tomorrow. 1 billion, maybe 20 billion. And you think with your data, you can kind of anticipate that. You can't. And this is an absolute nonsense. What you can do is create something that influences tomorrow. And that way you guarantee your future. And so, I worry enormously that we're becoming over-reliant on this thing called data rather than imagination. And at times data is very, very good. It's knowledge.
Yeah.
But just remember, that's what data is. It's knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's important that you respond to that. But it has its limitations and they're huge.
If you're enjoying this episode and finding it insightful, I want to take a moment and remind you, if you haven't already, to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It's a small action, but it makes a big difference. Not only will you be the first to know when an episode drops, but it really helps us to continue to create this content for leaders like you. And I'd love to hear from you. So if you've got thoughts, questions, or ideas, feel free to drop them in the comments. Also, if you want to explore how my leadership training and coaching can support you and your team, then drop me a DM and we can have a call. Thanks so much. Now let's get back to the episode. It's a lovely word you just used there, which I think we're not using enough anymore, is imagination. Is imagination something you've always had as a kid? Did that drive a lot of your creativity?
I was a great daydreamer as a child. I was quite happy to be on my own. Quite happy. I mean, I was very social and all that, but I used to dream about things and what could there be and things like that. So I was always, that part of me was always there. And I think in a way, as you hopefully hold on to that as a creative, if you go into any creative industry, that sort of desire to dream, to imagine, what could it be, kind of feeds your creative spirit. And it's very important. And understanding as a child how play is, play fundamentally important. It was interesting. I was at IKEA. I gave a talk at IKEA early in the summer in Sweden. And they had, before me, they had these 4 brilliant child psychologists. And they'd done a whole project on children. And they had these child psychologists talking about children's development. And they talked about play. And they said, not play as in football or cricket or tennis or, where there are rules, unlimited play. and how fundamentally important it is to our development, how fundamentally important it is to our ability to socialize, interact, listen, understand, social needs, all of those things. And it's brilliant. She was from Exeter University, and I can't forget her name now, which I can't remember her name, which is terrible. And she talked about taking that into your adult life and how important that is. And it was just interesting, and I thought they were absolutely brilliant. And again, what they were talking about is the importance of this development of you as a child and how you take that into your later life. But the thing I did, and I often do this, so I was talking afterwards, and so I got out and I looked up the dictionary definition of play.
Nice.
Right? Then it's quite interesting to do things like that. And of course it says something like, I can't quote it absolutely, but it says something you do for fun, but it isn't important.
Oh.
And so I go on and say, this is absolutely brilliant. I think this is one of the most inspiring talks I've heard for a very long time. But isn't it tragic that society is defining it as something that's not important? And that gives you a kind of clue about always look up I have this thing about always look up the meaning of words. They can either let you down, or they can really kind of ignite an idea, which, you can do that. But anyway, so that sense of play, that sense of dreaming, it was something that went through my career,
Quite naturally new. And what did it feel like when you knew that an idea you'd come up with, and you just get that feeling of like, this is a great idea? What's that feeling you get?
Oh, I always say, when I was creative director, I used to say to all the creative teams, obviously the men only, we had some fabulous female creators, but this applied to the men. This is the closest you're going to get to giving birth. And because in a way it is, it's good fun getting there, Then you give birth, which can be really, really, really hard, Then you've got to nurture the idea. You've got to protect it. You've got to stop people trying to make it do things it can't do. And then eventually, as it develops and grows, it tells you what to do, but it says, no, I won't do that. So it is brilliant having that. And I've never actually, it's a really good question, that, but with everything that I've done, I've kind of stepped back from it and looked in. And I've, although you kind of have ownership of it, and you did it and you created it and all that, you also step back, and it is like a bit like having a child. You have to step back. Yeah. That child then becomes has its own identity, and I always thought that with ideas, and it's fascinating. I found, for me anyway, looking at it in that way.
I just think it's brilliant. I think being a creative, being able to take a blank piece of paper, or just and type a script or come up with an idea, I just think. And in the time frame you're sometimes given as well. I just think it's a phenomenal skill.
You say that, but we're all creative.
Yeah.
That's it's very, very important for us to remember that. We are all creative. It's just some of us earn our living by doing it. Actually, what you're doing is being creative. This is creativity right now, this interview, where we go, how we go, what do we talk about?
Yeah.
So you're being creative. It's just recognizing your creativity, recognizing what it means, how to define it. Two types of creativity, what's at the core of creativity. Understanding all of those things makes life a lot better. That's part of a mission that I'm on now. But, that sort of ability to kind of sit down and with it always excited me, a blank sheet of paper. I was never frightened of it. And when I was because I went to art school, from art school to design school, and I can always remember that when I was in design class, most of those wanting to go into design, which I wanted to go into advertising. I'd been exposed to ideas and I loved it. And I love design. I love kind of, shapes, colours, typefaces. But, nobody ever went to war over a typeface, I mean, I'm not going to change the world with Franklin Gothic extra bold, It's not going to happen, Power to the people might do it, but, in Franklin Gothic extra bold. But so ideas to me were always crucial and important, and it was the blank sheet of paper. And we'd be in design class, and somebody would have, and all the designers go, oh, I don't know, what do I do? And you go, well, just have an idea. It can be anything, And we're afraid of having ideas, and you can have a completely stupid idea, but actually, often a stupid idea is a brilliant idea. It turns out brilliant, and Nigel Bogle. We're not going to expect him to be creative. What? Are you completely mad? God's sake. Turned out to be a brilliant idea.
I think a lot of it is in terms of, I think there's a lot of fears behind it. 'Cause people probably can do ideas, but I think it's putting your idea then on the paper in front of someone, that fear of judgment, that fear of failure, the fear of not being good enough. And I think that stops a lot of people.
Yeah. People feel they're then being judged.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you put on some clothes, I'm not going to put that on, I might look silly, you know. Somebody said that about my suit, actually. But you've got to overcome that. And if you're running a creative organization, you've got to have a culture within that organization that respects all ideas. It might eventually reject them, but it respects them as they're put down in front of you.
Yeah.
You don't know, little bits of it could be just fantastic. And it's just being prepared to kind of take time and look at it and make people feel they can be stupid. Children, going back to children, when they're playing, they don't judge themselves. They don't go, oh, no, I can't. I'm not going to be a spaceman. That's stupid. I can't even get up there. Why would I do that? No, I'm a spaceman.
Yeah, dream big.
Dream big, whatever it might be. And we lose that and we become judgmental. And then we lose part of our creativity. So cultures around, in any creative organization, ensuring that you have a creative culture that allows for kind of the madness is important.
And then thinking of your leadership, thinking about, how fear can come in. Fear is a very normal emotion that we experience as human beings. Can you reflect on a time where, fear maybe influenced you? Did you ever have any fears of putting your work out there, or fears of being a leader and suddenly responsible for all these people?
I didn't fear about being a leader because, I don't mean that in any arrogant way, but it just naturally occurs to you. You don't suddenly go from being a junior art director to being a leader. You go through stages, and those stages, because once you're an art director and you have a little bit more control, then you become a leader with that idea. And you have to work with people around you, and you're going to, oh yes, you do that. That photographer's going to do that. And again, so you're learning leadership as you sort of climb up the ladder, if we can define it in that way. So it's a gradual process. I think a kind of fear can creep in when you've had an idea and everybody around you is going, are you sure, John? And you go, oh dear, am I sure? Am I the only one here? Is this, And you just have to hold on to the courage of being different. Not for the sake of it, but because that's part of what is going to make a brand stand out. So you have your difference is built out of a kind of logic. This is why I'm doing it. Not, I'm just going to be different for the sake of it. Well, I suppose, anybody could do that. But creating a difference that links back to the requirement of a brand or an idea or whatever it is fundamentally important. But you do sometimes go, is this so different? I mean, we had that with when we developed Flat Eric for Levi's, and they wanted a different kind of hero. And I said to the team, I think what we should do is, I've seen this fluffy puppet, and I think maybe he could be our hero. It was shown to me by Philippa Crane, the producer of Levi's. She showed me this work and said, this guy's interesting, fantastic. And I lodged in the back of my brain, I was interested. And when the brief came in that said, we've really got to find a new kind of leader, a new hero, I thought maybe it could be this flat little puppet that we end up calling Flat Eric. But people around me were going, John, and the client, I had to go back 3 times to the client to sell it. And eventually they kind of went, okay, if you really believe in this, John, we'll go with it. But there was a moment of, is this completely mad? Have I lost it totally here? And you've kind of got to do, if you're not doing that, then, you're not really pushing the edges of the envelope, as they say.
Yeah.
Not an expression I like particularly, but you've got to be able to do that. You've got to be doing that. If you're not doing that, if you don't fail occasionally, then really you haven't pushed it far enough. Yeah.
And how have you been able to encourage that in others? So you've led a lot of creatives. How did you encourage great work from them? What did you learn as a leader about bringing that out in others?
I think and I learned this from Charles Saatchi, actually, and he was brilliant, Charles, and he had that facility of being able to say to people and make people feel that they could be better than they were anywhere else. And it's a great skill. It's a brilliant skill. I learned that from him, and he was brilliant at that. And so I always, with the creative people, I made them feel that they could solve the problem.
Yeah.
They could solve the problem. And even when they came with some ideas that really hadn't done it, there would always be a gem of something there that you could pull out and say, that could be brilliant. Go away, think about it, develop that. So you've got to give them confidence and make them feel genuinely that they have the power, the ability to do it. And you could have pushed them in certain directions. And the great skill is, even if you've had the idea, make them feel they've had the idea.
Yeah.
And that's important, not for any, massive ego reason, but because they are going to have to solve more and more problems. You can't do it all.
And I'd love to know, in terms of, you've been a leader for a long time, and the world's changed massively, especially since COVID, in terms of how we lead and how we need to be more empathetic and more things we need to be aware of. Have you noticed that your leadership, the leader you were like back in the early days of BBH to the leader you are now, have you seen quite a shift in yourself?
Not really. I mean, I have this view of that, principles remain, but practices change. I mean, the fundamental principles are exactly the same. And it was just interesting, actually. I was watching, and I talk about this in my creative course, but again, they articulated it. There's a wonderful, it's on the BBC, it's about the three great artists, Leonardo, Michelangelo and Raphael. And do watch it. It's fantastic. It's how and there's a lovely, Walter Isaacson, who wrote a book about Da Vinci, talks about how Da Vinci sold himself. And what he understood was that he would go to kind of some prince, some principality, and they were all fighting each other. And what he wouldn't say, I'm a great artist and I can, he wouldn't. He would go to them and say, I know how to build great defenses, and I can make catapults go further than anybody else. I have the engineering skills. Oh, and by the way, I can paint great pictures. And so he understood how to sell. He understood that. And so those principles remain today. That's a fundamental principle that we should all remember. And that's how, as I always say, when people say to me, how do you sell work to a client? The way you sell great work to a client is you make them realize you've understood their problem. And you use their words. And I've seen brilliant ideas crash and burn because the creative people, because they were always asked to go and sell their work, not that it was always a great idea, who would just use words like, it's really cool and that's a great shot and da-da. And you could see the client going, all you're doing is doing something for yourself, not for me. And the skill in selling is to make somebody feel you've solved their problem.
Yeah.
And you've understood it.
They feel seen, they feel heard, and you've made them feel like they matter and you care about what you're doing. Staying with leadership here, what are you noticing then today that you realise that you'd like to see change in leadership?
Well, I think you can't lead through Zooms. As I always say, you don't bump into people on Zoom. But that's a slightly different point. You can't lead on Zoom. You've got to be in and around people. It's the incidental nature of leadership. It isn't handed down, from above. I am having a meeting. It's walking the floor, chatting, talking about what you saw last night, what you did, who you met, conversation you had, how that affected your work. And you're constantly doing that, all this. And I think today there's this sense of isolation. And sadly, I go into creative departments now and I see lines of desks with people looking at screens with headphones on. And I go, what's going on here? I used to try and say to all the people at BBH, creative people, your job in the morning is to come in, because you tended to work in pairs, is not to turn the computer screen on, but to turn that person on that you're sitting opposite. Yeah. Because you don't know what they did last night. And that conversation you have will then be the most unique conversation in the world. Nobody else is having that. You go on the computer screen, millions of people are on it. And they're looking at stuff that you can even see who's looking at it. It even tells you. And I think it's a great shame. And I think, so much great work comes out of, as I say that, the incidental nature of a conversation or a meeting or something like that. We've isolated ourselves, and technology is pushing us in that way. And it wants us to do that, but then it's in control.
Oh, yeah.
And people haven't realized it's controlling you. I mean, this is the first time in a way we have technology that controls us. Up until the digital revolution, we switched it on. We picked up a phone if we wanted to call somebody. Now, I'm not being, anti-technology, but just remember what it's doing. Be in control.
Very well said. Thank you. Just a quick pause to ask for your help. We received wonderful messages on how the podcast is supporting you as leaders and helping to normalise the challenges you face. To help us reach and support more leaders, we'd love your help. If you haven't already, please can you follow or subscribe on the platforms you watch or listen to us on, as it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. And now let's get back to the episode. On terms of too many meetings and things at the moment, I know something you and I were speaking about is the world has become very collaborative, which in one way is lovely, is brilliant. But I'd love to hear, you had a really lovely point of view of the risk in over-collaboration.
I think, of course, collaboration is wonderful, and we do it. And if you've had an idea and you're making it, you collaborate with all kinds of wonderful people to bring it to life. But this idea that you can get to a great idea through collaboration is complete nonsense. And it's a kind of management view of creativity. And it has come from management, because what they've done is we've got to have better ideas. I know, let's get everybody to collaborate and we'll get a better idea. No, you won't. You'll get a worse idea. You'll get an average idea. And we've got to recognize that it's individuals that make the contribution that changes. And, it's those individuals that have the ability to kind of really imagine something special that will create a great idea. And the other thing I always say, it's often, people argue about advertising and should we be doing it, and it's awful and it's selling stuff we don't want and all that kind of stuff, Quite how I was able to sell stuff to people they didn't want. It seems to be amazing. Must make me incredibly powerful. My God, I could sell. I don't really want this, but advertising made me buy it. But we forget that actually the right to have an idea is a fundamental democratic right, along with the right to vote. The right to have an idea and go and tell people about that idea. It is a fundamental democratic right. And when people talk about, and now we all collaborate, it's reducing the individual to the group. And it's almost like Soviet in its thinking. You're not allowed to have an idea anymore. You've got to have it collaborating with all these people. I will collaborate, but when I've had the idea. And, as I always say, there aren't many advertising agencies in North Korea, but they don't want you to have ideas. They don't like people having ideas. It's not right. 1984, read the book. So when I hear this word collaborate, I all that happens is I rapidly get to a word consensus. And I'm trying to create something that's very different. And it's going to break out. And it's not going to be like everybody else. But I want to collaborate with great people to help make that idea even better, which we've done, and it's worked enormously. But so remember where collaboration comes in. Yeah,
and it can also make it very difficult. Then who's taking the lead? Who's making the call?
Exactly. I mean, we know the old cliche, there are no statues to a committee. It's kind of, I think it's deeper than that. It's a fundamental right, and that's important to us. Be able to express yourself.
Exactly. And I think, unfortunately, in this world, a lot of people are getting suppressed right now. And it's actually finding our voice to speak and be okay to have ideas.
It's a lovely phrase, isn't it? Finding your voice. It's your voice.
Yeah.
Remember that little word in there called your?
And you only get a short amount of time to use it.
Exactly.
Let's make it work. In terms of creative industries, we see a lot of ego within the creative industry. What's your take on people being okay to have an ego, or to be, I don't have an ego? What's your view on that?
Well, I think, again, it's a sort of misunderstood term. Ego is fundamentally important. Ego is I. I believe in this. I don't want to walk into a room with a group of people who go, I don't know what to think. I don't know. What do you think? I want people to have a point of view. I might disagree with it. I may well disagree with it. But it's a point to have a discussion around. If you don't have an ego, well, what the hell are you doing in the room?
Yeah.
Now, the danger is if ego becomes hubris. So that moves from I to me. Hubris is me, I'm more important than you. And then that's when it goes wrong. But we misunderstand. I keep hearing this, and I know that the word, he's an egotist, and so, yes.
But used in the
Deal
right
with
way.
it.
Yeah. And I say, as long as it's used resourceful.
Do you think Elon Musk is an egotist or egotist, whichever way it was? I think he probably was. Steve Jobs an egotist? I think he probably was. Was Michelangelo an egotist? Yes, I think he probably was.
But look what they achieved.
Yeah, and it's so you have to know how to manage it,
Yes.
not suppress it. That's the important part. How do you manage that?
They look after it. And conscious of the time, and I know that I can't leave this interview without finding out, because you left me hanging on our prep call, what is the Suitcase story?
Well, it's lovely. It's a part of BBH's culture, actually, and it was a great lesson in my life, actually. We as I said, we decided to leave TBWA. We couldn't get the kind of conditions we wanted, so we were going to set our own agency up. And when you're a director of a company, as we were at TBWA, you couldn't actually announce that we were going to leave, because as a director, you're legally required to ensure that you do nothing that undermines the value of that company. So in a sense, you can't talk about it. So it wasn't until our leaving was officially announced that we could then begin to debate what we do as an agency. And we'd obviously had legal documents drawn up. We could do that. And so we had our very, very first meeting when we were contractually able to do so. And we had no office. And I said to John and Nigel, well, look, I lived in Highgate at the time, North London. And I said, let's meet up at our place, at my place, because it's easier and everybody can get there. So we did. And John Bartle turned up with all the documents that represented the agency in this sort of brown cardboard. It was 1982, it had no wheels on it, not like today. Sort of suitcase, and put it down, and opened it up, and that was our first office in a sense. It had everything in it. And I can remember, I said to them, that's great, and then anybody fancy a cup of coffee? I'll go into the kitchen and make some coffee. And I stood there and I thought, oh my God, we've left TBW. And all we've got is a bloody suitcase. That's it, a suitcase. And I suddenly realized at that moment, no, it's our energy that is going to drive this company. So our energy is going to make this company happen. And it was just a reminder of that. The only physicality was a suitcase, as opposed to an office with, ads on the walls and stuff like that. Yeah, sort of, a presence.
I just love that when you think about where it began, this suitcase, to what it is today. Just how, and I think anyone listening to go for it. If all you've got is a suitcase to start with, just look what's possible. Look what's possible. And then I'd love to know, how did you know it was time to leave? And was it hard to leave BBH?
BBH, yeah. Well, I think you've grown the company. John Bartle had retired. He wanted to leave at the end of '99. Nigel and myself continued. And we just felt it was time to resolve, for the next generation of leadership. You have to do that. Nigel was very good at that. How do you actually keep the company going when you've gone? You don't just, go, if you prepare it for the next generation. And to make that happen, you really did have to not only stand back, but go. But you couldn't be kind of leaders hanging around in the ether, so to speak. And so it was an important moment. We created a deal with Publicis when we got everybody shares, we got money for everybody, but we created an opportunity for them within Publicis, which was autonomy within, so that all they had to do was do great work and make a degree of profit, and then Publicis couldn't tell them what to do, so they had autonomy, and that was very important. But you sort of do know, you feel it. You feel that, and to be absolutely honest about that as well, I felt that, here we were in the middle of the sort of, digital revolution, social media, and, I could see clients looking at me going, are you on kind of YouTube? Do you kind of, and no, I didn't really, and I could see that they wanted to have a conversation with a 24-year-old who was a digital native, as opposed to me. And I kind of realized that. And you've got to know, when to step away. Of course, now I find myself being increasingly asked for my opinion, because I think we've gone through it's all very well, but what about an idea?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you come back into kind of the frame again. But I think it's important that when you step back, you step back.
And you know when to go.
Yeah.
That's lovely. And to finish, I'd love to know, what would be the advice you'd pass on to younger John?
Well, it would be. It's a quote I've used a lot, which is do interesting things and interesting things will happen to you.
Lovely. And my word, has that happened for you?
Well, yeah, and get lucky.
Get lucky. Thank you so
Jo,
much.
lovely. Lovely talking to you.
Oh, it's brilliant. And it's to give your time for this as well. And just thank you for all your contribution to creativity and the work you're still doing. It's absolutely inspirational.
Love it.
And it's a real honour to meet you. Is there any final words or any final shares before we close?
No, I do, because I'll say this, I'm 80 years old, and people say to me, John, why do you go on doing it? Because I love it. And I do say to everybody in response to this, in my view, Frank Lloyd Wright was one of the world's greatest architects, no question. He died at the age of 91. He died 6 months before in my view, his greatest building opened, the Guggenheim in New York. So if he'd retired at 85, we wouldn't have the Guggenheim. So, keep going. If you love it, keep going.
And that's where you get your energy.
And get some energy.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for listening or watching, and we'll see you next week. Take care. If you've been loving our Courageous Leaders podcast, please can I ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the quality content coming and reach listeners like you that we can then really, really help. We fund this podcast ourselves, so to have your support means that we can keep delivering week on week. Thank you.